tonight we are here with Rob McQueen. He's going to talk to us about managing and planting your own greenhouse as part of the how-to workshops that we have organized this summer as part of the Thames Regional Ecological Association. So welcome, Rob, and thank you so much for your explanation today.
Yeah. Well, I'm anxious to show everyone because this has been an experiment, and I feel in a lot of ways I'm a forerunner for everybody, because I'm trying to go ahead into the future and show people what it's going to look like into the future and what direction we need to go. And that's one of the reasons that I got the greenhouses. This is the first of my greenhouses. I tore down 5 greenhouses in order to get this one greenhouse. That was the deal. And then I bought another greenhouse. So the purpose of this greenhouse was to grow trees in it. I was thinking the future might not look too bright, so one of the things that we will need in the future is trees, food-bearing trees, and the sooner I get them in the ground and growing, the better. And so that was the reason I got this greenhouse, is so that I could grow trees. The other greenhouse, I'm going to grow weeds in it, and the purpose for growing the weeds is to get people to understand that there are weeds that are more nutritious than the garden foods. And so if we're going to need to grow as much nutritious food as possible. Anyways, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Tom Hindle, who just went by. He was kind enough to allow me to put his greenhouse on his property. So anyways, so this greenhouse is 48 feet by 30 feet. So it's approximately 1,440 square feet. Now, I tore it down in Chatham and I brought it here in the winter. And then what we needed to do to start with is we needed to level the ground or do something. And so it was going to be a difficulty in leveling the ground. So rather than leveling the ground, as you can see, I've got 2 layers of 2x6, and it was easier than digging the ground down and around it and leveling the whole area. So instead, I just made double layer of 2x6, and then I leveled the 2x6 out. We got a transit, and then we marked out what the heights should be, and then I just brought it up to the right height. So on the corners, I've got rebar that's going into a pail, and that will be filled with gravel. The reason being is we want as much weight as possible, because if we get a really bad wind, I don't want this going off like an umbrella, Anyway, so the rebar going around the whole building goes into the ground a couple of feet and everywhere. And we had no problem with wind blowing it off. Our problem is blowing the plastic off. And that's the problem. So when I come here in the day, one of the first things I do is I check out here to make sure that these poles are in, so that the heat, we'll talk to you about the heat later. Now this is called wiggle wire, and if you look at it, we had to put the wiggle wire on the arches. So we screwed those on, and then we put the plastic down, and I had to unloosen it in order to accommodate lifting it. And so what you do is you work your wiggle wire like this. You get it in like that. So you give it a twist up in the up direction, down like that, and you just go up and down until you get your wiggle wire and it holds it in place. It ripped because of some problems with the wind blowing, so anyways, I'll have to pull it over a little farther over in that direction. But that's how it's done. So it's done only on the outsides. The only place that's intact is on the outsides, on the far ends. And then in the winter, what we did is we laid these out and we put rebar and planks and anything we could do to get weight on it. And we don't want wind blowing through, because the wind will cause a lifting. And the other thing is you don't want the excess wind blowing the cold weather through. Now, the plastic here, there's three three different kinds of plastic to my knowledge. There's the clear, and then there's two other ones that block the light. You can get one that blocks the light 35%, and the other one blocks the light 65%. The one I ended up, this is a mistake that I made, is I was wanting one that blocks the sun 35%. So I said I wanted 65%, meaning I wanted 65% light going in, but they misunderstood, and because the lack of communication, so I ended up getting 65% blockage. It works, but I wanted some blockage is because if you get clear, and I've got trees in here, if you got clear, because it's clear, the sun in the day, it can be really cold outside, but then if the sun comes in, it warms the temperature up, and the temperature goes up and down really radically. And so I wanted to block a fair amount of light so that we don't have up and down, because you don't want you want your trees to be in a state where they're cold and they're on the verge of being frozen. You don't want them going above freezing and then dropping down, because that kills the roots. It causes the moisture in the roots to expand when they're warm, and then when it gets cold, it contracts and it rips the tissues, and it'll kill your trees. So anyways, that's what I'll show you here. As you can see, you got lots of trees this direction. When the wind blows it from this direction, we have no problem because the wind is blocked by all the trees in this direction. But behind the greenhouse is an open field. And so I'm going to show you how we're going to deal with that. The one day had a wind coming from the northeast, and it just about ripped the plastic right off this thing. And so I decided a method of fixing it. Doing this greenhouse is a result of mistakes I've made or things that have happened to me that have been a problem that I had to rectify them or come up with a solution for it. As the wind was blowing, it just about blew the plastic off. And so I got these planks so that if we ever do get another wind, these all, I've got T-posts, and we'll have these T-posts up against it. And it'll block the wind on the bottom. If you get up higher, the wind will skip right off the roof. But it's the bottom part where it hits the most because it's coming on an angle like this. Okay? It's running water off of top of this building. And surprisingly, this building is about almost identical in size as this one, the greenhouse is. So if you look how big the greenhouse is, it kind of gives you an idea how big the greenhouse is. But we get a lot of rainfall coming off of that. And so the water comes into this one, and then we have a hose coming off like this and dumping in there. And then I have a hose that I drilled and I put a tap on there that I run into the greenhouse. So that's everything outside now. Most of the things that I've learned were a result of having a problem. And so I'm just responding. So I've learned as much from my mistakes or circumstances as I have from, anything I've ever tried to learn, anything that I've ever watched on YouTube, it never prepared me for this. And so when I first got the place, I didn't know how hot it was. I moved about 200 trees in here. The door was shut. Everything was closed up, and it literally went to 50 degrees in here and cooked 200 trees. So the message is, got to keep an eye on the place. And then you've got to learn how to accommodate cooling the place out. So that is why I've opened up all the sides to let the air flow through. Now that was the first thing I did. The first step was to open up the sides. And so, and then I had a problem because they keep closing. And so I built some structures here in order to allow me to keep the plastic up. If you can see the sides. So I got a piece of wood like this. And this will lean against the greenhouse, the rib, and the plastic will hold it in here. So it was just a simple little invention that opened the sides up and allowed the air through. But as we went through that really hot period, and it still was too hot, so I ended up opening the ends, and that cooled it down by 5 degrees. But the problem was, when it was outside, it was 37 degrees, right? And so inside here, we were going up to 47 degrees. So it was still too hot. And so I ended up, I put a window up there. If you understand, well, of course you understand, heat, whenever it's hot, the heat rises. And so I put a window in there. I haven't had time to put a window. I've got another window put in there that I got from a construction site. And so I just put a hole in there, and another window will go in there. So that's the next thing that I did for heat. Now, I ended up having a problem with watering. And if you see, I have different sizes. This originally was my first platform, and it was up this way, this high. And it was meant so that I could work on it. It was going to be on my work table. Anyways, and we went through that heat period, and like I look at the thermometer here, and it was cracking pretty close to 50 degrees in here still, right? And when we had that heat spell. And so I thought, I reached down to get some plants off the ground, and I realized, holy smoke, it's much cooler down there than up here. So even up here it was 45 degrees, 47 degrees. And so when I went down, I realized when it's down here, we're at 35 degrees, which is 10 degrees cooler. So everything was caught, all the sawhorses that I had built, their legs got chopped in half and everybody went down. That was where it was cool. So anyways, and then I had these from the other greenhouse. There's mesh here, and I got mesh, and I put planks across, and then I put the mesh on top so that it keeps everybody in line. But then I noticed that because of the weight of it, the 2x4s that I have underneath are starting to sag. You've got to realize it's got soil and it's got water, and especially because I got more water in there, it's getting heavy. So I was at a job where we were stripping down a house, and I've got a lot more lumber. I'm going to put a lot more in. But the other point, I'm trying to level it. So the next problem was that I had a problem with watering. I would be watering, and I would go and I would try to hit. Some of them were dying because I would miss one. Because I was watering during that dry spell and hot spell. I was watering literally every day for, like 2-3 hours in here. It was like 45 degrees in here, and it was hot. And so, I would go out of here, and it was air conditioning outside. Everybody was complaining about how hot it was outside. Well, I was going out, and there's air conditioned out there. So to accommodate this problem, I decided I'm going to make something different. Instead of me watering every plant, I was going to level these platforms out. And then I got these boxes here, and I cut the boxes down along the side so that the boxes weren't so tall. And I also got a lot of fruit ones from the produce departments of grocery stores. I would ask them, like I'd go in the morning when they're putting out the produce, I'd ask them for those, and they were happy to give them to me. And so I ended up putting a garbage bag in, and it becomes like having a saucer under a pot that's in your window. So I put the plants, like I can put a lot of plants in there, and then instead of watering one at a time, if this is level, this part isn't level right now, But instead of watering one at a time, I could just dump a couple of these in and it would water them all at the same time. So I could water 20 plants at a time, which was a lot faster than doing one at a, trying to go like this in some pattern that you're going to get every one. So that was the next step. And then it was still drying very quickly. So what I ended up doing is when we got a big rainfall, I would come and I would just empty the barrels, and this would become a reservoir. I would put lots and lots of water in here. The barrels would be empty, but the rain would keep coming and it would fill the barrels again, and I would have a couple of barrels worth of water in the plants. Then I would never miss a plant because I had a couple of days extra water in there. And when I went around, I would just look around and see if there was any water in the base, and I knew that I was watered, right? I might top it up, but there was always that little extra. So now another thing that was a problem was because it was so hot, the soil would get hot. When the soil is hot, the soil gets dried out. And so how do I do that? Well, what do you do in a garden? In a garden, if you want to cool things down, you put mulch around it. So we got grass clippings. And so I just put grass clippings around, and that saves me a couple of days in watering, because the sun doesn't beat on it and it doesn't dry it out.
So you can just pick grass from your backyard?
Anybody. Even if you see somebody cutting their lawn, or some of these landscape companies, just go and ask them for some, and they'll be happy to give some. Another thing you could use is sawdust. Sawdust, I just put sawdust around it. Now, sawdust will take a little bit away from the nitrogen, so it'll work, but the grass clippings are better because there's more nitrogen in the grass clippings.
What's your opinion of straw?
Straw? Well, my problem with straw is that most straw has been sprayed with Roundup. Unless you can get organic, and that's pretty tough. But if you go out to the farmer's property and you see the track marks in the fields, that means that was sprayed with Roundup. And I had no interest in having Roundup on my... I mean, these guys were trees, so it would be a long time before they're used. But anyways, I wouldn't use, just as a general practice, I wouldn't. So anyways, I'm going to show you, these are containers I got. I got service berries. I go out and collect service berries. This is mulberries. So I collected mulberries, and I went and found wild cherries. And in the fall, I'll go out and I'll find hickories. I'll go to a farm where they have northern pecans and edible chestnuts. And then people give me pawpaws, and then I start planting them all. So anyways, this is what I'll do with my these are mulberries. So what I'll end up doing, I use a very soft soil. It has a lot of peat moss in it. And the reason being is that I'm going to end up with a lot of plants in one pot. And so if you're going to end up tugging their roots apart, then if the soil is really easy and really soft, they tug apart without ripping the roots so much. You don't want to rip you want them as well intact as you can. And this is elderberry. So I was thrilled to death that they grow from seeds. I've got probably 300, 400 of them. So I've taken a lot of time with them. Seeing that it is good for the flu, I thought I'm going to grow lots, because who knows whether it works for COVID, but I know it works for the flu. You take the juice from the elderberry and it'll knock the flu out. And so I put some on here, like a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. Later on, because they're full berries, I'm wanting the berries to rot, and the soil will help it rot, and the seeds will be individual. And then what I'll do is when the flesh of this is broken down, I'll crush it so the seeds are all independent, and I'll spread that into a couple more pots to spread them out so they're not so many in one, so they don't have to have so many being harmed. And then I'll get my lid. Right now, I want it to decay the flesh of the fruit, and so I'll do that, and then I'll make sure you label everything, because you forget. Oh, you forget. And then you look at it and what the heck is that? And you have to figure out what it is. And if it's a new plant that you've never grew before, you just kind of question, what is that? And so I'm going to be writing this many times, so I'll just put elder. Instead of elderberry, I know. And so use a permanent marker. And I do it on these. I get these at the Dollarama. They're cheap. They're a buck, I guess, for 100. And so, I go through 8 or 10 of those packages, and then I'll put that on there. And when it's decayed, I'll break it up and put it in other containers. And then it has to go into the refrigerator. It has to go in the refrigerator for the winter, or in here. You know, it has to be stratified. It has to go through a period of time where the winter is there. All plants in North America, they realize, holy smoke, it's cold. It must be winter, and they don't grow. And then in the spring when it's warm, they say, wow, isn't that nice? It's warm. Let's start growing. So, but you have to go through the cool period. Now, like I said, I learned a lot through all of my mistakes. I had these guys stacked up 10 high. Now, because I'm new to this, I didn't label it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, that I had them up. So I don't know whether it was 1, 2, 3 on the top or 8, 9, 10, but only 3 of them actually grew something. So the question is, what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to have everything labeled, and then I'll have some that are stacked, and then I'll have some that are laid out flat, and then I'll find out which ones were the ones that came through the winter and grew in the spring. Because if I lost the 7 of the 10, I want to know if it was because they didn't get cold enough, because they were on the bottom and were sheltered from the other ones, or whether they were the ones that were on the top that actually froze. So I know that which ones actually were the ones that produced some plants. So label everything. That you have to understand that this is a great big experiment, and you've got to label everything as much as you can. And even if you don't think of it's that important, label it. Here, I'll show you. I bought a different soil from different sources because it's all out of my pocket. I bought it whenever I could get it inexpensively. So this is just basically what I'm thinking. It's compost. And then I got this one from a different store. And then these ones are potting soil, so they have a little bit of peat moss and manure in those, and soil. So this is going to be softer. So this is better to put my nuts in for the winter, because you want peat moss in it and vermiculite, because then it'll retain the moisture. But the peat moss, because of its acidity to it, it'll keep the bacteria down. You don't want fungus growing in your seeds or killing them. Another thing that I learned was I threw a bunch of hickory nuts in one of these pots because I didn't have time, to put them in most of the time I put them in a bag. And anyways, I threw them in a pot, and I actually got more growing out in the pot. But the thing is I don't know if it was because the pot was frozen more, or whether the other ones got in the bag, got fungus from it. I'm not sure. So that's going to be another experiment I have to try this next year. But I'll label it so I know. So, and then there's other things that I've discovered too. I had dried a bunch of plants. You're supposed to put them in water, and the ones that go to the bottom are the good ones from what I've read. And the ones that don't go to the bottom, that float, are supposed to be not that good. And so I was going to eat those. But then I thought, you know what? I'm not eating them anyway, so I had plants, nuts that were 100% dried. Well, they probably not 100% dry, but they were very dry so that they wouldn't go fungusy so I could eat them. So I threw them in water anyways, and I got a lot of them to sprout. So I ended up with, you know, an extra 100 plants that way. So you never know, you know, plants are fickle. They make the decision, you know, whether they're going to grow or not. And we can think about it going to grow or not, but we don't know. So I just plant everything now. You know, I'm even doing some other ones that were dry, hoping that I get some more. So I was going to show you, these are some of the plants I've got growing. These ones here are hickories. This is a hickory from this year. And last year was my first experiment, and I started growing them last year. And this is a hickory from last year. So I must be doing pretty good, because the hickory this year is almost as big as the one that I had last year. So I got hickories. This is a northern pecan. I've got two kinds of northern pecan. There's one with a shorter nut, and there's other ones with bigger nut. These are edible chestnuts. They're pretty fickle. It's pretty hard to get them to come through the winter. And so this year, because a lot of them got mold, and a lot of them died from fungus being on them, and so this year, instead of put them in a bag with peat moss and vermiculite, I'm going to plant them in individual pots and see if that works better. Because they're wonderful. They're called sweet nuts, and they're a wonderful plant to eat. You don't need a nutcracker. You just put a nick in it. You can sometimes even put a nick with your teeth, and then you can rip it. So, and they're very sweet.
And that's called, you said it's called hickory?
No, that was sweet nut. It's an edible chestnut. Not like the horse chestnut that you see in the city. This one is entirely different. This is one from last year, and it's not doing that good, but I've learned something. This is from this year. So, and I found that sometimes if one dies, they'll fire up another one or a couple of them. So don't discount them, because plants are built to survive, and if they've got any energy left in their roots, they'll fire up another sprout if they can. I even found one of the squirrels, they ate the top of the plant off, and I found just the root, and I planted the root, and the root sent up another sprout. So they have a real survival instinct. This is Elaeagnus, or autumn olive. I love these little guys. I tried doing some cuttings of, this is a currant. And so I did the cutting of a currant. So I've got some currants that are growing from cuttings. They were pretty good. And then this is butternut. And from what I hear, it's an endangered species. But these guys jump out of the ground. Outside, I've got this big, and they started 2 months ago. They just jump out of the ground. So I'm really happy about that, because I've got probably 300-400 of them growing. This is how they stayed over the winter. I just put them in between two pieces of wood, and then I threw all kinds of this potting soil on top of it, and I left them for the winter. And I was afraid because they didn't come up until almost June. And I thought that I had killed all these butternuts, these endangered species, that I was the cause of them dying, but I was thrilled to death. They started sprouting, and then it just went crazy. I had a hard time keeping up with them. So these are the elderberries. I've been, because of the, like I said, because they'll knock the flu out of people, I've done a lot of experimenting with the elderberries. I've had cuttings, and you have a lot of problem with mold with cuttings. So you can't overwater with them. And the other thing is, you have them in one big pot. You got to get them out of a pot as soon as you see any root growth. You get them in singularly, and don't water over top, because if their leaves get wet, they're prone to fungus. And I'll show you that later. Here's another cutting it's also having a problem with fungus, but it's surviving. Now the reason I'm showing you this one is because I plant all my cuttings in a clear pot, and then I can see what's going on inside. I can tell the health of the plant by what's going on inside. But now that it's okay, I'll put it get into black pot because I know that it's fine. This is one that I found out in the wild, and it was just a little guy, but it was just the same structure as this. So I dug it out of the ground. I got enough root from it, and then, but the problem is that there hasn't been a main stem come off it. So I'm not sure what's going to go on with that. But it's an experiment, and if I find out that it's not going to do anything, because it has to get a main stem so that we can get some elderberries off it. But if it stays like this, I know it's a wasted effort. I won't do it again. Here's my elderberries from seeds.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Because the branches are growing, like the stems are growing outwards. So
Yeah.
it doesn't make it a good plant.
No. Okay. Because we need a main stem. These aren't really true trunks. It's not a true stem.
So they probably won't produce.
I'm just guessing it won't. Okay. But I'll grow it to find out. That's how you experiment, right? You grow it to the full grown. Anyways, these are the ones that I grew from seeds. I'm thrilled to death. You know, I've got 300 of these guys. And so I'm transplanting them right now. Sorry?
Those are the elderberries?
These are elderberries, yeah. I'm
so
thrilled to death because I just threw them in a pot hoping that they would grow, and they grow.
Yeah, it looks pretty lush.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful. You know, because you think about it, there's probably about 300 elderberries in the city right now. I'll double the number just 1 year. And that's the thing. I mean, we're humans, and we can think, we can create, we can design, and we can go out and do whatever we want to do. Well, if I can double them this year, next year, because I know they work, I'll be growing thousands of them. So we'll have, forests and forests of this stuff. There's one of the ones that I've got repotted from one of these guys. So they transplant quite well. That's why I pointed that one out. This is one from 2 years ago. And at this point, like another couple of years, we'll be getting elderberries on that one. And this is the thing that I'm finding really successful. Like, if I get a silly notion in my head, I'll try it out. Now, these were kind of little branches. Like, there was the elderberry tree, right? And you get something, a little sprout coming off of here in the spring. And I took that little sprout part that was about this long, and I put it in the soil. And you keep it wet. You can't let it dry out. Every day it looks very wilted, and you keep watering, and I get them out of the sun so they're not direct sunlight, so it's not being stressed. I keep them in semi-darkness for about a week, and then I take it out into more and more light, and I'm thrilled to death that every one, like where I have the cuttings, maybe 1 out of 5 cuttings will grow, and where these ones, every single one of them went. I put 10 in the ground, and every one of them grew. So I was thrilled to death of that. And that one's called a softwood cutting. This is a hardwood cutting because this is the hard part of the tree. This is softwood because it's just the first year. So these are all the things that I'm experimenting with and excited about. So here's some of the things that I do. I'm in the process of fertilizing things. So I get fertilizer, and of course it's all organic. And I'm experimenting with different ones to see which ones are the better ones. Someone gives me manure from rabbits. Manure from rabbits is really good. It's really strong and it's good. And then people are giving me coffee. And why coffee? Coffee has a lot of nitrogen in it. And so, a natural nitrogen, and I throw a handful in that, and then I use it and I throw it into the plants, particularly the ones that are fairly light. So, okay, I'm going to show you pawpaws. Of course, pawpaws are another one of my favorites. Here's what was in my storage, and I found some pawpaws seeds that were 2 years old, and they were dry, and some of them were sprouting. And so I took them, and so these, I put them in water, and I throw them in here, spread them out a little bit. It's soft soil. It has to be in a deep pot for pawpaws, because pawpaws will fire down a root that's 8 inches to about 10 inches long before it even comes out of the ground. You won't see this for a month, at least a month. So, and then another thing is that sometimes you'll see these guys come out and they'll have a seed on top. And I couldn't understand why that was happening. And then I discovered it was probably because I didn't plant enough soil on top of it. This thing has to grow past it. The soil has to hold this in place, and then the seed will come up through past it and come out of the ground. So you spread them around in a pot like this, and then I put a couple of inches of soil on, and then pack it down a little bit and water it. The thing you have to understand is trees have a tremendous amount of energy in them. And some of the butternuts that I was growing in here, they would grow that long. Okay, so these are pawpaw seeds that I had. I had about a couple hundred, and only about, I don't know, 80 of them started. And so they started slowing down. I was told that pawpaws will grow all the way to autumn, into August, and still be sprouting. And I was thinking that they slowed down. So as an experiment, I threw them back in the refrigerator. And the reason you throw them in the refrigerator is I'm hoping that they went to sleep thinking, oh, well, it's winter time. I left them in the fridge for 6 weeks. And now I brought them out, and I'm hoping that they think, well, it's dang warm. It's summertime. So maybe I'm hoping that they mix them up and they start growing again. These are the ones I planted in, I guess it was March. Anyways, I'm very happy with them. Plant really well, and so you just put a lot in there, and then next year I'll get them really wet, and I'll pull the roots apart, because they don't have a lot of fibrous roots. They're more just a tap root. And so I'll pull them apart, and then I'll put them in individual containers. I was running out of containers, so I ended up just using this is all off my penny, so I ended up using anything I could get. This one is actually a 3rd year. I didn't have a 2nd year one to show you, but this is the 3rd year. This is the 4th year. This is the 5th year, and this was the 6th year last year when we got it from Lois Ward's place. And we took it. It was a transplant, and they didn't really like the transplant very well. Like, I had 3 of these, and they looked like they were dead. And I just kept putting water and water and water, and hoping that they would come along. And then all of a sudden, this guy put out a leaf out here. And I thought, wow, isn't that great? It actually had enough energy still in its root that it put it out. And then it started going higher and higher. I'm sorry, this one. And it put this leaf out, and then it started going higher and higher. And if you look at the other plants, they're the same thing. They're all starting lower, and then the energy is going higher and higher in them. So this guy, there's a guy that has an acre of pawpaws, and he said he doesn't get any fruit. And so I'm going to take some of these guys out to his property and plant them, and hopefully the cross-pollination works. I said, I don't want the fruit. Well, I'll take a few fruit, but I don't care about the fruit. What I'm looking for is seeds. Because if he has an acre of them and I can get thousands of seeds, I could be growing a lot of pawpaws. So northern pecan, and northern pecans have a tendency to burn. So these, you got to think of these as they're little babies. You know, they're new to the world, and we wouldn't go out and stay out in the sun very long. And so these are the same thing. These guys have a little wax on their leaf, and if the wax breaks down or they're in the sun too long, too soon, they'll burn, and you can see the burning. So, and that's just the same as like the pawpaws. The pawpaws are an understory tree, and they have to stay in a partial shade for 2 years at least. And then I've got several lengths of them. Now, another thing that I did to, accommodate me not having to do too much work is I got a lot of the plants outside. I got large skids, and I put them outside so when it rains, I don't have to water them. Another thing I was going to mention is I found out where the sunlight comes at 12 o'clock, and I put in stakes along, and I put all my plants behind the 12 o'clock point so that they get the morning sun that's not as bright, and then at night you can see they're getting the light from the nighttime, but they miss 4 hours of the hottest part of the day, so that I'm not ending up getting them burned. I lost a lot of hickories that way last year. I had them in a greenhouse, and I took them out of the greenhouse not knowing that they need to be sheltered from the direct sunlight, and they burned, so I had trouble with them. One last thing that I'll point out about the soil is, like I said, make notes on everything. A lot of these plants, there's weeds in them. There's purslane. As much as I like purslane, I don't want to have to pick it. I don't want it in my garden and having to pick that. I don't have time to do that. There's lots of different kinds of weeds. And so next year when I plant, I'll be planting what soil I used and whether there was weeds in the soil or not. Because then that's one less job you have to do. You'll pick the soil that doesn't have weeds in it anymore. I'll segregate them, I'll put them off to the side, and then I'll leave notes with them. Okay? So these are dry nuts. I'm going to throw them in and see if they grow. And these are the elderberries that were struggling, and I'm just going to continue watering them, and I'm going to see if they'll revive. And I found that a lot of plants, if you just keep watering them, they'll revive. Here's another one that they're having struggles. Oh, here's a chestnut. It was cold in here, and some of them developed a mold. I even watered from below, and they developed a mold, and they didn't get much bigger than that. That's why I'm going to plant them in their single pots next year. But some of them did survive, and they did get past that. So you know that these guys are stronger. But I'm going to hold them, like I'll keep these guys going, because maybe next year the winter kills off the mold. I'm hoping that it'll send up. They'll be a year late, but they'll have a pretty good root on it underneath. But I'm hoping that they'll send up a sprout and get back at it, So now, and over here, there's not very much chamomile in the city. And so I grew some chamomile, or chamomile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chamomile, and I can give the seeds out. Okay? So, anyways, here's the line where it's 12 o'clock. It goes like this, and then it goes like that, and everything is behind 12 o'clock so that they don't get burned.
You could spend the whole day picking these berries, Rob.
Well, you know what? That's the treat.
They turn black.
Yeah, they turn black. It's just starting to ripen. But I'm sure that I could probably get 2 quarts of berries just for that. So that's why I want to grow those. You know, can you imagine thousands of those? And so if you get 1 layer of plastic and you get humidity in here, you'll get drips on you. So if you don't want drips on you, to me, I don't care. So you put 2 layers of plastic and then you won't get condensation on your plastic. Anyways, I wanted to show you something else. One last thing. I was wanting to grow some stevia, which is a semi-tropical plant. And so this year, I'm going to make a cold frame, and then there's part of the cold frame, and I have all these double doors, and they will be the top of the cold frame, and that will be 2 layers of protection for the semi-tropical plant. And I'm hoping that it survives the winter that way. So if a person has double doors or something, you can get that and then put it in the frame and try that for an experiment. The reason I'm doing this is because the future is uncertain, and there's a possibility of population growth and at the same time soil depletion, and I'm worried about that. And I'm nearing the end of my life, and I thought to myself, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I thought, I want to grow trees so I can feed people. And if I can feed people, that's like my life being extended. And I can stay on this earth as long as the nuts are growing, and, you know, like, I'll be around 100 years from now in my nuts. So anyways, that's why I'm doing it. I want to feed people. I love people and I want to feed them.